Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I think the standing room only crowd. There's a few seats up front. Please take a seat up front. Thank you for joining us. There's a few. Please, gentlemen, come over here in the front. My name is Philip Munoz. I'm a professor in the political science department at the law school, and I also direct the Center for Citizenship and Constitutional Government. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our first lecture of the school year. Welcome back. It's great to see you. The mission of the center is to cultivate thoughtful and educated citizens, to support scholarship on the principles of a free society, in the ideas of constitutional government. We do that in a number of ways. We have lectures like this one. And as you mentioned, this one is co-sponsored by the Napa Institute. We do a Napa Institute Forum lecture every year where we bring leading Catholics to campus and the fruits of the Catholic intellectual tradition, lectures that bring the fruits of that tradition to our campus. So we're very grateful to the Napa Institute and Tim and Steffi Bush for helping us bring our speaker tonight. For the undergraduates, we direct a minor. I direct the Constitutional Studies minor that's operated by the center. So if you're interested in questions of constitutionalism, philosophically, historically, practically today, come check out the minor. It's an interdisciplinary minor in the College of Arts and Letters, and about a third of our minors are business students, and nearly half of our minors are outside the College of Arts and Letters. So if you're interested in picking up a minor, please come talk to me or to Soren or Mary Frances in the back afterwards. And then we have an undergraduate fellows program. These are not the only things we do, but let me mention that as we have a lot of undergraduates here. Our Menard Family Tocqueville Fellows. The Tocqueville Fellows, they meet with our speakers. Many of them will be meeting with Ms. DeSanctis tomorrow, so I'm going to have dinner with her tonight. So they get to meet with our speakers. They get to suggest events to us. This event itself is the fruits of the work of some of the Tocqueville Fellows. So if you're interested in any of those programs, please come talk to me after the lecture. A few announcements. Happy to announce these two events we have coming up. They haven't been publicly announced yet, so you'll be the first to know. On Friday, October 14th, in Notre Dame time, that's known as the Friday before the Stanford game, we will be hosting Congresswoman Liz Cheney for a lecture. So you can come watch her give her a farewell address. It's Congresswoman Liz Cheney. That's going to be Friday afternoon, October 14th. And then on Friday, November 4th, that's the Friday before the Clemson game, we're having Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina will be speaking. So I hope you'll join us for both those events. Okay, we have a tradition here at the center. We have one of our fellows introduce our speaker. I'm going to ask Milo Fogarty to come to the podium in just a minute. Let me introduce her first. Milo is president of the Pro-Life Club. She's also one of our student fellows. Before Milo introduces our speaker, though, let me say just a quick word. Rarely is one of our speakers one of my former students. So I had San, I think her junior year, in a seminar. So I think it was a church state seminar. I didn't know her before she enrolled in the class. I think I'd read some of her student writings, but I didn't know her. And she was very quiet in the class. She was very intense, looking at me intensely. I didn't know if she was mad about what I was saying or she liked what I was saying, but she didn't speak at all. So this happens from time to time. I mean, as a professor, you probably don't, we're very curious to know what you think. And so I was eager to read her first paper. Once I read that first paper, I thought, this is so special. It's been the joy for me to watch her develop from a Notre Dame student to now a world famous author. And I like to think we here at Notre Dame and the center have just a little bit of part of that development. She also married another Tocqueville fellow. So we're a full service program. It's a Thursday night. The lecture will get over early tonight. You gentlemen should start asking women out. Okay, let me ask Merlot to introduce Anna. Thank you, Merlot.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. This is the first educational event that Right to Life is doing, so we're very excited to have you. Alexandra DeSanctis is a 2016 graduate of Notre Dame, where she studied political science, constitutional studies, and theology. She is now a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in their Life and Family Initiative on culture and family issues, with a particular focus on abortion policy and pro-life advocacy. Since 2016, DeSanctis has been a writer for the National Review, where she covers politics, elections, culture, and abortion policy. She first joined NR as a William F. Buckley Jr. Fellow in Political Journalism with the National Review Institute, and since 2018 has been a staff writer and regular commentator on NR's podcast, The Editors. Her writing has been published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the Atlantic, among many other publications. She also speaks for high school and college audiences across the country about abortion and the pro-life movement. DeSanctis is the co-author with Ryan T. Anderson of the 2022 book, Tearing Us Apart, How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. We are thrilled to welcome her back to campus for her talk today, How Abortion Harms Our Politics and Disadvantages Women. Please give her a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Merlot, for that introduction. I have to start shortening my introductions, I think, because they're getting longer than my talk, and that is never a good thing. I have a lot of people to thank before we begin. I'm probably going to miss somebody because the people sponsoring, it's a long mouthful of a list. So I certainly have to thank Right to Life and Merlot for inviting me in the first place. I'm grateful to be here. This is my first book talk on a college campus since the book came out. And I'm actually also not speaking with my co-author, Ryan Anderson. We've done a few events together, and I like speaking with him, but I know for a fact tonight that no one is going to say body-self dualism, and I'm very grateful for that because he's the only person that would ever say that. So I also need to thank the Napa Institute for helping co-sponsor this and the Center for Citizenship and Constitutional Government. I'm grateful to be here, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm especially excited to be here, not only because this is my alma mater, but because we're here in a post-Roe v. Wade America. And I think that's something worth celebrating. I think I'm certainly grateful. We should all be grateful to all the pro-life leaders who went before us, who brought us to this moment. And I'm overjoyed that so many unborn children will be saved going forward, already are being saved. But my talk tonight is situated in the context of the fact that we have a lot of work to do. The end of Roe is not the end of the fight over abortion, far from it. In many ways, and the case we make in the book is that this was only the beginning. This is not a moment to sit on the sidelines as pro-lifers. None of us can do everything that needs to be done, of course, but every single one of us can do something, whether you're in college, whether you're a professor, all of us have a role to play. So tonight I want to share some thoughts about the abortion debate, kind of the big picture, and I hope they'll help you as you find your place as pro-life advocates in the fight, or help you sort out what you think about this issue if you're not quite sure yet. So let me start by saying this. Ending abortion in our country is about more than abortion laws. It's about building a pro-life society. Abortion is a grave moral evil, but we can't unseat an evil by naming it or attacking it. We have to have something to say about the good. We have to be able to explain that abortion is wrong because life is good. This is something that we write about a lot in the new book. So the subtitle of the book is How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. It might sound kind of inflammatory or overstated at first glance, but I think it contains a really important truth. 50 years ago, during the initial fight over abortion, as the debate over abortion was kind of getting going in this country, advocates for legal abortion ahead of Roe promised that abortion would solve problems. Right? They pitched this as a solution. But 50 years later, I think quite the opposite has been proven, especially for women. Right? The promise was abortion will be good for women. And in fact, the opposite has turned out to be true. And as we write in the book, abortion has created endless problems in its wake. For one thing, the most important thing, it destroys the life of unborn human beings to the tune of 60 million plus at this point. But it's destroyed entire aspects of our society. It's destroyed relationships between men and women. It's torn apart marriages and families. It's harmed our politics, our rule of law, our culture, our medical system. And so in our book, what we were trying to do is make the case that as pro-lifers, we have to be equipped to talk about how abortion harms the unborn child, of course, right? That's the fundamental problem with abortion. But that's not enough. We have to be able to say to people who aren't sure what they think about the issue or who might support abortion for whatever reason, abortion is bad for all of us, and here's why. Abortion is bad for women. Abortion is bad for fathers. Abortion is bad for families, for our politics, and here's why. We have to talk about more than the unborn baby, although we have to start there. So those are all the negatives of abortion, right? The things it's harmed. There aren't very many positives that I can think of, and we certainly tried to think of them in writing our book because I always want to give the other side a fair shake. But there isn't much of a positive case for abortion, and I think you can see this by looking at the case that the other side has made in the wake of Roe v. Wade being overturned, right? Probably a lot of you have followed the coverage of Roe v. Wade and Dobbs, and it's been more than 2 months now. I haven't seen anybody on the other side making a coherent, positive case for their preferred policy position, right? I haven't seen anybody saying abortion is really good, and here's why. They lost a major Supreme Court case. They lost this immense status quo that they had for 50 years. But in the wake of that loss, I have not seen anybody advancing the argument that unlimited abortion throughout pregnancy for any reason is a good policy, that it's a good thing, that it's a positive thing. I think that silence is very telling. And instead, what have we seen, right? We've seen a strategy from the other side of trying to put pro-lifers on defense. We've seen the other side claiming that pro-life laws will harm women, claiming it'll make it difficult or impossible for women to get healthcare in complicated medical situations. This simply isn't the case, okay? Last month, I went through every single pro-life law that's in place in every state across the country. I read the text of the bills. Every single law allows doctors to exercise their best medical judgment to care for the health of women, to protect women if their life is at risk, to take care of women in medical emergencies. These laws prohibit only one thing. They do not prohibit giving life-saving care to women. They prohibit directly and intentionally killing the unborn child. They prohibit abortion. And it's precisely because the other side doesn't want to talk about abortion that they've spent their time mischaracterizing pro-life laws. So what does that mean for the pro-life movement? For one thing, I think it means we're correct to say that abortion is not a solution. Not even the most vocal advocates of abortion seem to want to defend it on its own terms. So it's important to look at what they argue instead, right? What is it that abortion supporters say? If they won't say abortion is great, if they won't explain what policy they want and say why they think it's a good thing, what is it that they say? You can hear it in the way they talk about pro-life laws. Women need abortion. That's the argument. Women need this. So my suggestion to you tonight, as anybody who wants to, in the audience who's pro-life and wants to learn how to talk about this issue, think about this issue, I think this is the fundamental argument pro-lifers need to learn how to respond to, with compassion, with clarity. We know how to make the case that abortion ends an innocent human life. We know how to explain the unborn child as a human being with moral worth. We know how to explain why my right to choose or reproductive rights or this isn't the government's business. We know how to explain that that case is not good enough. We need to learn how to explain that abortion is bad for women too. Let me give you just one example of how you can do this. So in my new book, my co-author and I spend the whole second chapter talking about how abortion harms women. Not in the business of picking favorites out of the book, but I think that is probably the most important chapter because this is the most prominent argument we hear from the other side, that abortion is good for women, that women need abortion. And one of the major points we make in that chapter is that women suffer after choosing an abortion. Now, not every single woman by any means, but these women do exist. There are lots of women who've had abortions and who suffer after having done so. We don't hear about these women, right? I think these women are sidelined, silenced, and that's a very bad thing. I cannot emphasize to you enough how important I think it is for us as pro-lifers to have compassion for women who have had abortions. So many of these women suffer alone in silence for years, afraid to tell anyone what they did. I remember at one point I was thinking about, women who've had abortions and how we have to have room for them in the pro-life movement and welcome them. And I tweeted about this. And I had a woman send me a private message saying, I had an abortion and I've never told anybody. Thank you for saying that. Because I felt so bad. I never even told my husband. And now I think I might. Thank you for saying that, which I don't know how a tweet can felt that, but I'm very glad that it did. I think there are a lot of women out there like that. These women suffer with crippling guilt and regret a lot of the time. Some suffer from drug, alcohol abuse, even suicidal ideation or suicide. And sadly, these women are almost always ignored or even attacked by people who support abortion. I've found in my experience, I'm sure there are people out there who are an exception, but it's rare to find an abortion supporter who's willing to acknowledge the psychological toll that abortion takes on many women. Why would that be? I think it's because the suffering of these women undermines the notion that women need abortion, that abortion is good for women or that it solves women's problems, right? What I wonder is how could it be the case, truly, that women need to commit violence against their own children in order to save themselves, or that they'll be better off for having done so? If that's actually true, then we're facing a set of problems in our society that abortion could never hope to solve. So this past spring, Professor Munoz was kind enough to invite me to debate pro-abortion feminist Joe Filipovich on campus. Some of you might have been there for that. And we debated the resolution, women need abortion in order to be free and equal. So in my remarks in that debate, I made the point that we can't decide whether women need abortion. We can't explore the question of whether women need abortion until we answer the question of what abortion is. And in her response and her remarks, Jill entirely ignored that question. And in fact, she outright said it doesn't matter. She said it doesn't matter what is in the mother's womb because women need abortion. She wouldn't even touch the immense scientific, moral, philosophical, political questions at stake, because she believes so deeply that women need abortion. It doesn't even matter. So let's unpack that a little bit. Like I've already said, we all know what abortion is, right? I'd venture to guess every supporter of abortion knows what it is too. They just don't want to talk about it. It ends the life of a human child. And the reason I think that even abortion supporters know this is because if they didn't, they wouldn't care so much about abortion. Feminists wouldn't think that they need abortion so badly. So to understand what I mean by that, let's zoom out for just a minute and talk about the roots of modern feminism. Feminists in the early 20th century were almost 2-1 opposed to abortion. We don't have any exception. All of these feminists opposed abortion. They believed it was immoral. Yes, they believed it wasn't the taking of human life and that was wrong. But they also wrote very compellingly and spoke very compellingly about their belief that it was bad for women. They believed that abortion placed the responsibility of pregnancy, childbearing, childrearing, even more on a woman's shoulders than it already was, rather than requiring men or society to become more welcoming to women and children and to support mothers and children. They basically argued that it was an easy way out for a society that already was inclined to place burdens on women. But feminist thought began to change a lot around the time of the sexual revolution. Around this time, society began to prize consequence-free sex as a necessary aspect of human flourishing. The idea was that if we can't have sex with whomever and walk away, we're not fulfilled human beings. This was a very deeply entrenched belief at the time, and this new wave of feminist thinkers embraced this idea. They began to believe that true liberation required the ability to participate in consequence-free sex. And so they began to argue that there was something deficient or bad or even oppressive about women's bodies. So think about it this way. It's a simple biological fact that sex can lead to pregnancy, and if it does, the woman's going to become pregnant and the man is not. So the very facts of sex and human biology, female biology, make it literally impossible for women to participate in sex the same way that men do. Men have the biologically inherent ability to walk away from sex as though nothing happened. Women, if they become pregnant, do not have that ability. So because society had begun to value consequence-free sex, walking away, as an essential element of the good life, feminists began to hate their own bodies. They began to see their own bodies as an obstacle to fulfillment. They began to see their bodies as a roadblock to being on equal footing with men. So in their worldview, you can see why contraception and abortion would become necessary. They were a way of controlling female fertility or eliminating the consequences of sex, children, so that women could pretend to walk away from sex in the same way that men can. Now, there are a lot of problems with this, right? There's an uncomfortable hatred for women that's inherent in this worldview. Contraception and abortion stem from a deeply anti-woman philosophy. It's a mindset that prizes the male mode of embodiment and sees the female mode of embodiment as somehow deficient or problematic. This philosophy also, I think, unfortunately, takes the male abandonment model as the standard. It takes the fact that men are able to walk away and the fact that they do, and turns that ability into an ideal. Instead of demanding that men support women and children, this worldview demands that women be let in on the ability to abandon those who rely on them. But there's another problem here, right? Contraception and abortion don't actually solve the female body. They don't magically turn women into men. They require women to chemically alter their healthy bodies and/or participate in an act of violence against their own children in order to pretend that they can participate in sex the way that men can. This is not actually a solution for women. It's another form of oppression. So what does all this mean for the pro-life movement? I think it means our project is actually a lot bigger than we might think it is. We have one project, an important one, protecting unborn children from the violence of abortion, but it turns out that this project actually fits within a larger one. Protecting unborn children from abortion will require going right to the root of the sexual revolution and rejecting it. Until our culture rejects the belief that you must have access to consequence-free sex in order to be a fulfilled human being, people will always think that women need abortion. I'm going to say that again. I think it's really important. Until we reject the belief that you have to have access to consequence-free sex in order to be a fulfilled human being, people will always think that women need abortion. That's how deeply intertwined these ideas are. I'll give you another example. I'm sure most of you are active on social media. You could tell me better than I could tell you what social media was like after Roe v. Wade was overturned. For me, my social media was mostly full of people, mostly women, young women, talking as though the world had just ended. I saw comments from women saying they no longer had any rights. The government was trying to control their bodies. Men had more freedom than they did. Men were treated as more fully human than they were. I was extremely puzzled by all of this, and it was in thinking about that, everything that I saw, that made me kind of come to some of the ideas I'm sharing with you tonight. The Supreme Court decided that states can now protect unborn children from the violence of abortion. How did it happen that so many women became so deeply and sincerely convinced that protecting unborn children would undermine their own rights, their own ability even to be a free and equal human being? It's because of the way that abortion is part of the sexual revolution. We can never fully understand the argument for abortion and the angry response to the loss of Roe without understanding the sexual revolution. And we can never reject the argument for abortion until we're willing to grapple with that philosophy. Women only think they need abortion. People only believe that women need abortion in a society that prizes sex with no consequences. In a society that has decided the female body is deficient and that pregnancy is an unwelcome burden for both women and men. Children in this view are only valuable when they're wanted. Sex is mainly for recreation only, and we can disconnect magically sex from children with ease if we want to enjoy it without the possibility of bringing new life into the world. But unfortunately, for some people who wish this were the case, that's not the truth of the matter. It's a distortion of the true, fundamental, unchangeable nature of sex. And it was brought about by the self-centered, adult-oriented philosophy of the sexual revolution, which redefined freedom, right? Freedom is the ability to choose the good, to choose what's in accord with our nature so that we can flourish. And it instead defined freedom as license, or the ability to do whatever one wishes, regardless of the natural consequences, and with technology to kind of help manage the natural consequences as much as possible. So if sex without the possibility of children is fun or desirable or something we want, we can make that happen. If two independent adults want to have sex and never see each other again, we can make it happen. If two adults happen to bring a child into the world by accident and don't want it, they want to get rid of it, we can make that happen. This is a philosophy of radical independence. None of us owes each other anything. That's why this worldview rejects the dependence of the unborn child and rejects the dependence created by the fact that sex inherently can result in women becoming pregnant. Radical independence requires setting men free from the burden of women and children, and in turn setting women free from the burden of pregnancy. But in reality, because of our very nature, the idea that we can participate in no strings attached sex was always fiction. In reality, sex tells the story of fundamental human dependence. We enter the world in a state of radical dependence. Every single one of us was dependent on our mother and father to bring us into existence. As an embryo and a fetus, we were dependent on our mother to carry us in her womb and give birth to us. But the truth is that we carry that dependence throughout our entire life. As newborns and toddlers and children, we depend on others to feed and clothe and house us. And even as young adults or adults, all of us right now depend on everyone around us, right? We depend on someone to keep the water running and the lights on. We depend on someone to grow our food and sell it in the store. We depend on our employer to provide us with money. We depend on our friends and family to support us. Being human is to be dependent ultimately and inherently on God, who created and sustains us. The world in which contraception and abortion succeed in propping up a landscape of uncommitted sex is a fictitious world. It's a world that can never exist simply because of the reality of human nature. It was never possible for human beings to exist as entirely independent creatures, able to follow our whims without experiencing brokenness, suffering, or natural consequences. Just look around at the world, right? The world the sexual revolution has created. Tell me if that's what you see. I don't see a lot of freedom and fulfillment, but I do see a lot of brokenness and pain. So let me take that sentence I shared a minute ago and turn it into something positive. What I said was, until our culture rejects the belief that you must have access to consequence-free sex in order to be fulfilled and flourishing as a human being, people will always believe women need abortion. Here's another way of saying it, a positive way of saying it. Once our culture embraces the reality of human dependence, once our culture embraces the fact that sex tells a story of dependence and not of license, people will begin to see that women do not need abortion. So where does that leave us as people with a role to play in building a pro-life society and a pro-life future? It means we have to learn how to talk about abortion not only as violence against the unborn child, but as one major problem that stems from a bigger false anthropology. We have a responsibility to learn how to explain that women don't need abortion and that abortion actually harms women. We have to make the case that abortion harms all of us. And we have to make the case that the sexual revolution is built on a giant lie. The lie that human beings can use and destroy each other if it happens to bring us pleasure. But more than all that, I think we have to make a positive case. It's a case for a truthful anthropology that recognizes the inherent dependence of every human being. We have to advocate and build a society that cares for women and children, that welcomes the vulnerable, and that values every human person. Thank you.
Yes, we have plenty of time for questions. Below has a microphone, and we have a tradition in the program that we always invite our students to ask the first questions. Any undergraduate students? And please wait for the microphone.
When you started writing and working for after graduation, you expect to
Yeah, I know. No, I definitely did not expect that. I mean, I have always hoped, I've been pro-life my whole life, and I've always hoped that I would be alive for Roe to be overturned. I did not expect to be 6 years into my career when it was overturned. Obviously, I'm happy, but I would not have predicted that. No, I thought it was going to take a lot longer.
Might I ask you just when you stand up to the press of you and your name and where you are at school?
Okay, so I'm shooting a question. So my question is currently today reading notes. How would you lead to certain portions of people? Some can say you're seeing Congress cause justification for the federal portion. All other people said protecting what the issue of the state issues. My question is, what do you say on that? Do you still federal
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the big picture of where I stand is incrementalism is a good thing. So if right now the best we can do is 20-something states that have some form of a pro-life law, that's a great place to work from. We shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But I do think I haven't fully done all my research, made up my mind 100% on this, but I'm inclined to think that the 14th Amendment protects unborn children because it provides equal protection of the laws to all citizens, all human persons. And we now know, I think the correct understanding is that unborn children are human beings and therefore members of the moral community. And so that would give Congress justification to pass a federal law on abortion.
I was just wondering from the thought that students, especially undergraduate students, conduct consultative conversations about this and really just specifically at the student.
Yeah, I love that question. It's pretty hard to do, I think, but the main way on a college campus, at least that I found through events like this, really, if you join clubs where you're a lot of like-minded people can gather, you can discuss things like this there, and then come up with ideas for how to best approach the campus community. So someone asked me, we had a small dinner before this, and someone asked me how to talk to a family member or a friend who doesn't agree with you on the issue. And I think that the question of how to approach a campus is very similar, right? You have to start by listening and hearing where people on the other side are coming from. What is it that people need to hear who disagree with us? What is it that they're not understanding about our point of view? What can we offer them, right? Think of it as that we have something to give. These people who don't understand this issue are hungry for the truth, and it's a real service to provide it. And so I think it would start with, kind of small groups of people who agree with you, brainstorming about what you have to offer and the best way to do that. So probably through events or dorm, small dorm discussions or things like that would be the best way to do it.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a engineer. I'm one of the recent doctor argument I've heard a lot is from professors is thinking that really thought abortion was murder and didn't tolerate. It's forced to people who actually have abortions, but you do, so you don't. What would you say?
Yeah, that's interesting because that suggests to me that the current hatred of free speech has just trickled into everything that people think. I'm not threatened by the fact that people disagree with me, right? I think that I have the truth on my side and I'm confident enough to share it and to hear what other people say if they disagree. I want to talk to people who disagree with me because that's the only way that minds are changed, right? Whether someone had an abortion or they support abortion for whatever reason intellectually, I want to talk to them because I think that I have the truth and I want to reach them where they are. And I can't do that if I say you're not allowed to talk to me. Right? That's not how we change minds and hearts. That's not how we form relationships. And to me, I think it's very telling that people on the other side are the ones often who want to silence pro-lifers, right? If you're confident in your argument, you don't need to silence anybody. You don't need to say you don't get to talk. You can hear the other side out and respond with confidence. I don't think there's any threat in open discussion. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a Christian law student here. And I was wondering if you could add back your kind of thesis about consequences, free sex. So I was trying to kind of quote what you wrote.
Really studying up there.
They said people always want to be abortion.
Yeah.
Sex without consequences. So how much should we pro-life circles in general talk about contraception, which enables consequences free sex?
Yeah.
To kind of combat abortion, just cutting the back to contraception. Or putting back in terms, like how much should we focus on humanity over?
Yeah. Well, that's a really tough question. I could probably write half a book at least on that question. So I'll just take a stab. And this is a line of thought that I've only just started thinking about more in depth because I think you can 100% make the case against abortion coherently without talking about the sexual revolution, without talking about contraception, right? Because killing an innocent human being is morally wrong. All human beings deserve government protection and so on, right? You can do that. You can do all of that. But it's a more coherent and compelling case if you can understand why people think they need abortion. And the reason women think they need abortion is because they think it's important to participate in sex. And if something were to happen, right, pregnancy, they want to be free. And so you can't really get to the root of why people think what they do about abortion if you're not willing to talk about all of it. That doesn't mean we have to like rush into the streets wanting to ban contraception, but the logic of it all does go together. So if you read Humani Vitae, like you said, it really does, like it's all one coherent piece. So my kind of wriggle out of the question answer is, it depends on the context, right? There are people you're going to be talking to about abortion, or events are going to have about this, or laws are going to write about this, where we don't need to talk about contraception at all. But there are going to be other times where that's going to be helpful to explain, look, this is all one piece here. The idea that you can have sex and there's no consequences is a fiction. That's not real. Or maybe you're talking to someone who doesn't like the effects of contraception on their body, right? And they don't want to take birth control anymore. They're wondering if maybe something's not quite right about this or whatever. So I think it's more of a case-by-case basis kind of thing. I'll get back to you if my thought changes on that. Yeah.
Wondering, how do you deal with secret approaches versus the issue of yes, it's true, once you get there, you're not really all that much,
Yeah. Yeah. I would say two things. The first is, I think the relationship that you have with that person is more important than if the end of the conversation is them saying they agree with you. And so if you have that conversation in a way where the other person feels heard, they feel like you really wanted to understand where they were coming from, who knows, they might come back to you later, they might go do research on their own. You never know, that maybe they're angry because they agree with you and don't want to admit it, or who knows. So the way we conduct those conversations, the way we treat people in that situation is more important, I think, than the end of the conversation or how it seems to have turned out. And then the other thing I'd say is I had a teacher in high school who would always say the truth sticks. And I think about that a lot because I think there's something to that, right? Just sharing something true with somebody, maybe it doesn't resonate for 20 years, who knows? But just having shared it, I think, is all we're really called to do. And we can pray and hope that that bears fruit down the line.
Hi, I'm DJ here. You had a pretty tweet that got a lot of traffic recently about Republicans that made masters in Arizona. He was saying he was totally changed his position on the abortion issue.
Yeah.
I believe, according to his campaign website, he says, and this is something which we asked him earlier, so I think you've already said some of the thoughts, but he does still support the possibility of being enforcement of the law. He says that it's okay to go state by state. So should we, as the pro-life movement on should we support solely individual states, only in states where it's politically viable, or should we go for something at the federal level? And if so, do you believe we should go for something that's more ambitious than, say, a third times?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of this is really a prudential question. I'm perfectly fine if Congress wants to vote on the Born Alive bill, even, which is not even an abortion restriction. That's great, right? Anything we can get at the federal level, at the state level, I'm happy with. I'm not the kind of person who says we have to have a total and complete ban with no exceptions now and nothing else is going to work for me. What I was trying to get at in that tweet, and social media is not a good place for thinking out loud, clearly, but what I was trying to get at is the pro-life movement, I think, is called to be something different than just an arm of the Republican Party, right? And so we can ask for more from politicians than saying the right thing about a certain bill or whatever, and then acting like other issues are more important to them. And so what's important to me as someone who is not, on any campaign or endorsing any candidates is, are candidates really and truly pro-life? Are they with us? Are they going to be with us when it counts? Are they talking about the issue like they care about it? Because a lot of this is not, it's about more than what bill we actually put in place. It's about how we use the advocating for a particular bill to change hearts and minds. And I think the country right now is in a place where people are good with a 15-week bill. People kind of understand that there's a human being here, there's space for conversation. So I think that's a good place to start. And I'm fine with politicians who think that. It's more of a case-by-case basis on particular politicians as far as I'm concerned.
Hello, I'm Natalie, I'm a sophomore. I think that many people could come to the conclusion that there is no such thing as consequence-free sex. I think we can identify that there are consequences. But how can we then persuade, convince, show them that those consequences outweigh their perceived advantages of having sex?
Yeah, that's an extremely difficult question. It's a $1 million question, really good one. Yeah, I don't actually fully know, but I would just say very simplistically, without being able to give it a lot more thought, people know when they're unhappy and they want to be happy, right? Everybody, I remember I had a philosophy class in high school where we were taught the main thing that everybody's looking for in life, the only thing we're really looking for is happiness. And Catholics believe, Christians believe, ultimately that's only found in eternity, right? But all of us have this longing in our heart for fulfillment, for happiness, to be loved. And I think that people who are pursuing that via, whatever sexual culture we have going for us right now are not fulfilled, and they know that. And so it doesn't really require convincing. I think it requires more kind of accompaniment almost, if that makes sense, right? Like, I'm here if you need anything. It sounds like you're not happy. Do you want to talk about that? Like, this person didn't seem to treat you very well, or you had to take a pregnancy test and that was scary. I don't know, whatever the situation is. Being there for people like that and helping them come to see what's not working about it and why, and showing them what's a better model that might actually be fulfilling and make them happy. I think that's really the best that we can do. Like, kind of not lead them or convince them, but just sort of be there as a resource as they figure that out for themselves. You're welcome.
My name is Evan. I'm a junior. So our thesis has to be doing the pro-life movement. That's what I call as far as the approach to a lot of Christians are taking. So personally, what do you think is the best approach to pro-life laws? Kind of a criminalization and penalization should be included when looking at legislation.
Yeah. So big picture, I think the goal of pro-life laws, there's two goals. One is to prevent abortions from happening as effectively as possible. And the second is to support or build up a culture that makes abortion less desirable, right? So call it a supply and demand kind of strategy. The Texas law was a good law insofar as it worked pre-Roe, right? That law, they found a way to get a law actually stay in place, even under Roe. But Roe is gone now, so we can have normal laws. We don't need to have citizens enforcing pro-life laws anymore. I don't particularly favor that model. I mean, I guess it works, but I think it makes more sense to have the state enforce laws. I think it's kind of messy, thorny, politically unpopular, all kinds of things. So for that reason, I would say a more traditional model will work, and it's better on some fronts than the Texas law at this point. And then I would say in terms of penalizations, laws before Roe, pro-life laws before Roe, and pro-life laws now punish the abortionist. I think it should stay like that for as long as we'll be alive. I mean, maybe culture will change enough to make that different, but it's effective, right? If you punish abortionists, they don't perform abortions. That's why abortion doctors lobbied the Supreme Court for Roe, because they wanted to perform abortions without consequences. So I think that's perfectly effective. And if our goal is to end abortion, we don't need to punish women. We shouldn't punish women. We should punish abortionists.
Thank you. What would you say about situations like you see the shooter where we have a law in place and you can enforce it? Situations like that, it seems that citizens being able to pursue legal action would be beneficial to have a constitution with laws.
Yeah, I mean, it could be desirable, but I think it would be better for the legislature or the governor to empower other public officials to enforce it if there are faithless prosecutors or a faithless AG.
So I wanted to kind of talk about how the House decision, parents' analysis, right, sort of calls into question conception and marriage. I wanted to ask you what led these discussions helpful and necessary when we're talking about pro-life, pro-family society, but when does it become unhelpful?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple of things. The first thing is the context in which he raised it was basically challenging the legal concept of substantive due process. So he wasn't saying, I don't like contraception, we should ban it. It was just, all of these cases are built on the same problem that was in Roe, which is this is not a good legal doctrine. And I think it's telling that all the people who've wanted to talk about that aspect of his opinion have been on the other side, right? There are not pro-lifers running around saying we need to, undo gay marriage or undo. First of all, it's been abortion supporters who are trying to distract. So like I raised the thing about abortion supporters, attacking pro-life laws as being bad for women's health. Another thing they have been wanting to talk about is how this threatens contraception or this threatens Obergefell. That's not true. There is no majority on the Supreme Court for doing that. Maybe there will be in the future, who knows, seems unlikely, but that's not what we're debating, right? We're debating whether or not abortion should be legal. And pro-lifers want to talk about that, and abortion supporters don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about literally everything else because they know that their position is not popular. So I would say it's not, the only sense in which it's helpful is if you're having a legal debate about the doctrine, or if you're talking about kind of like what Sean mentioned, humani vitae, how this is all of a piece, right? Contraception fuels kind of an abortion mindset, all of that. But otherwise, I don't find it especially helpful.
Here. I just wanted to ask, now that some states leaders are passing laws with abortion workers, do you think those laws themselves will have an effect opinion or the fact that most people change the world, have these on the change, think about that? Also, because the prior changing that was more than that personal conversation, the phrase often change on.
Yeah, I think that you need both. So your question is basically, how does law shape culture and which is more important? I think law and culture are equally important. I think that law is a very powerful teacher, right? I think the other side, so we're now at a level playing field, right? Roe has been overturned. States can pass pro-life laws or they can keep their pro-abortion laws, but we're not actually on a level playing field. Like pro-lifers are starting with 1 foot in the grave or whatever the idiom is, because we've spent 50 years as a country coming to think that abortion is fine and that it's good. We're just imbued in this culture where legal abortion is normal and we're supposed to have this and it's a women's rights issue. All these things that only exist because Roe was the law of the land for 50 years. And so I think in a very real way, the law sets the tone for what people think is okay. So today, people are not going to be like, oh yeah, abortion's bad because it's illegal now. But in time, yeah, it's going to change public opinion for sure. So I think it's important to do both. Law is not the only thing that matters. Culture is important. How we support women and families, whether we're rebuilding a marriage culture, that's all equally important, I would say. You really can't do one without the other. effectively.
Well, thank you for being here this evening. I'm here. You mentioned earlier the importance of the pro-life movement for life as a whole, in all aspects. So I understand that it's meant to promote pro-life and eradicate this culture surrounding abortion. But what does the pro-life movement seek to do to promote the life of those who have been born? Does that mean the anti-death penalty? Does that mean increased social welfare programs? Does that mean increased charitable donations? How do you see the pro-life movement helping those who are currently born?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of elements there. Some of that is prudential, right? So on the question of social welfare, that one argument might be, well, this is a way of helping people. Another argument might be social welfare programs aren't that effective, and so if we really want to help people, we have to find more effective means. But I think the pro-life argument ought to be to help people thrive. People who are already alive ought to thrive. It just takes different shapes. And I think the reason the pro-life movement has been so focused on abortion is that it's been legal for 50 years, right? This is the pressing battle in front of us. Human beings are being killed. And once that fight has kind of dissipated a little bit, or hopefully when that culture is better, then there'll be a lot of, certainly many more problems to turn to. I agree with you, but how we approach those, I think most of them are up for prudential debate. It's not clear that there's a one-size-fits-all answer to most of those questions, or how to be a truly pro-life society, right? What does that look like? Even within the pro-life movement, I think there's a lot of reasonable disagreement on what that would look like policy-wise, whether it's a question of private charity. That's all very much up for debate. So I would say, yeah, there's room for that, but it just hasn't been on the front burner because of abortion being the kind of pressing issue. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Schaefer, senior. In the wake of the Dobbs opinion, what do you see as the main challenges and risks for the pro-life movement? We all saw what happened in Kansas, and just a few weeks ago, a Wall Street Journal article came out and said that support for legalized abortion has actually increased since the Dobbs opinion. So what do you see as the future risks?
Yeah. To me, I think the biggest threat to making progress in the court of public opinion is the domination of the media by people who support abortion. And I'll give you, again, the example of what the last 2.5 months have looked like. Right? If you followed the reporting, the commentary on this, you would think that every pro-life law in the country literally says explicitly in its text, women's lives don't matter, and we can let them die. If we can save the baby, that's the only thing that matters, right? That is what people would believe if they do not do research, right? I had to literally spend 6 hours going through every single one of these laws and pulling out the text where it says women's lives are equally valuable, right? Doctors can care for women, and put it in an article to try and rebut this. That's how common it was. It was the only thing that people were saying. And it was being said because it wasn't being fact-checked. Nobody at major newsrooms was fact-checking this. It's just being repeated uncritically by everybody that pro-life laws are letting women die, right? That is, I think, the biggest threat. Now, there are a lot of political calculations. There's a lot of, do we focus on the states? Do we focus on Congress? A lot of questions there. But to me, none of that really matters if people are reading lies everywhere they look, right? How do we change people's minds if we cannot tell them truthful information and get it in front of their eyes? I think that's a huge risk. I don't really know how to solve that, but from what I've seen the last 6 years and even more recently, that's got to be the number one problem.
Hi, I'm Jack. I'm Stephen. The pro-life movement talk a lot about how it doesn't need to make social provision, actual needs to be
Yeah.
Yet, it does seem like most pro-life people are after some provision. Other things, why do you think that is? How do you think we can reach across the aisle and kind of roll that out like some other groups?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So it's definitely true that the majority, I would say, of pro-life people are religious, probably Christian of some stripe. There are certainly more non-religious pro-lifers than you would think. There are several groups explicitly of secular, atheist, agnostic people who are pro-life. So they do exist, they're out there. They unfortunately get drowned out by this claim that pro-lifers are trying to impose their religious beliefs on people. But those people are out there. My former boss at National Review, atheist, one of the most pro-life people I know. So it's definitely doable. And I think as pro-lifers, we should really amplify that, right? Find those people, talk to them, understand why they think what they think, share with others the fact that they exist, because I think that's important. As to the question of why it's more religious, I think people who are religious just have the formation of knowing the value of human life in a way that people who aren't religious might not have, right? We have a whole belief system surrounding the goodness of human life, that we are created in God's image, that we're valuable, that we're made to, love and be loved, all of this. The whole structure of our worldview is built around the value of human beings as being created in God's image. And so I think it's just naturally built in for a lot of us that the unborn are part of that. But that doesn't make it an imposition of our beliefs on other people, because it's not inherently religious to think we shouldn't kill people. That goes across religious traditions, right? There are a lot of religious traditions besides Christianity think abortion is wrong. So there are a lot of threads there, but that's what I would say.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. So my question is about post-abortion syndrome, and I said that chapter 2 is the most important chapter of the book. So what exact role do you think that it has to play in conversation now? Because it seems that whenever women are facing a big question of whether to get abortion or not, it doesn't really matter that we have something with credit. Do you think that it's more of an effective argument for people that are talking about all our culture and more of abortion?
Yeah.
Where should we start putting that?
Yeah. So I would say, I think that it's important to keep in mind that the number one reason women give for why they have an abortion is that they're not being supported, usually by the child's father, but they're not being supported. And so that means that we could eliminate, or someone out there, usually the father of the child, could eliminate most abortions just by saying, I will support you if you keep this baby, right? That's huge. We got to keep that in mind. I don't know that it would be especially effective to say to a woman in that situation, you might regret this later. Like, that doesn't mean anything to someone who's desperate or feels unsupported or whatever the case might be. I don't know that that's that compelling. I think we should talk about it more in the context of, this is not a solution for women, right? And we're pretending that it is for deeply rooted reasons, kind of what I was talking about in my talk. We're all pretending abortion is a solution because it facilitates this lifestyle we all think is great, but it's not actually, and these women have lived to tell the tale, basically, right? I think that's a context in which it's most helpful, and we don't really ever talk about that, right? And I think a lot about, the reason I wrote that tweet that I mentioned in my talk about welcoming post-abortive women is, I want to always think about, as a pro-lifer, what do the arguments I'm making sound like to someone who may have had an abortion, right? If there are people in the room, or there's someone I'm talking to and I have no idea they had an abortion, will they be open to what I'm saying? Or am I making them feel like they're evil, or like they can't talk to me, or like, whatever it might be, right? I think we have to think about the fact that many, many, many women have had abortions. Many people we know people who they love who've had abortions, and we have to welcome them, and they are welcome on our side, on our team, anytime, right? And so I think that has to shape how we talk about the issue. And the regret portion, I think, is more helpful for contextualizing why this is not actually a solution, right? It's a solution that's left a lot of women very, very much worse off. So not a solution, in other words.
My name is Lauren. I'm a sophomore. One of the things that I saw was right at the prosecution was women coming out and saying, the top pregnancy with miscarriage, that these treatments will not be available to women more than half of the cost. You can say that these are not things that are prosecuted or included all these costs to housing home. But when we have things like insurance policies that classify those procedures as abortions or something like that, it can be really difficult to get that across. So how would you recommend addressing that to other people?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I talked about it a bit in my talk, but I don't like to get into the nitty-gritty because it's very complicated. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. So my understanding is that, well, let's take a step back. The word abortion is used in the medical context to refer to both miscarriage and abortion. They just call it either spontaneous abortion, which is a miscarriage, or induced abortion, which is an abortion, right? Every pro-life law that we're talking about is only about induced abortion. So it doesn't outlaw any particular type of procedure. It doesn't outlaw any type of healthcare. All it does is say, basically, you cannot directly kill an unborn child, right? Which is an induced abortion. That does not have any bearing on insurance codes. That does not have any bearing on whether a doctor can care for a woman who's in a life-threatening situation. He just can't directly kill the baby. So the way to respond to this basically is to study up on what these situations are, right? An ectopic pregnancy, just to take one example, does not require directly killing the baby. You're saving the woman's life. So if you have to remove the baby and the baby dies as a foreseen but unintended side effect of that procedure, you're acting to save the woman's life. You're not acting to kill the baby. And so all this muddying of the waters is happening because we've learned to think about abortion as healthcare. We can't distinguish between an act that directly kills a human being and an act that saves someone's life anymore. And that muddying of the waters has made it hard to talk about those types of situations. So I think it's important to just kind of understand, medically speaking, what's going on and be able to explain that to someone.
Can you speak a little bit to some of the worries about how miscarriages being investigated, or people know that there are laws who have to be looking or searching for
Yeah, so every pro-life law, currently in place, every pro-life law that's proposed, to my knowledge, to the extent that someone is prosecuted for an abortion, it's always the abortionist. So if it's a chemical abortion, it would be the person who prescribed the abortion pill. If it's a surgical abortion, it would be the person who performed the surgical abortion. Women are not going to be prosecuted for having an abortion. Miscarriages are not illegal, obviously, right? It's not illegal to experience a miscarriage. And no woman is going to be prosecuted or investigated for having had a chemical abortion. The abortionist will be prosecuted. I haven't looked into every single one of these types of stories we see floating around. It's not a widespread thing. We don't have investigators stomping into women's homes, looking in their trash. That's not how this is going to work. The idea of the law is to make it politically, legally difficult for abortionists to perform abortions or prescribe abortion drugs. The goal is not to punish women. The goal is not to throw women in jail. The laws do not punish women or throw women in jail. So most of the time when you see these things floating around, they're typically a fear-mongering tactic for abortion supporters who want to make it sound as though pro-lifers are trying to throw women in jail. That's not what's happening. Trying to protect unborn children by focusing the law at the abortionist. So I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah. So my understanding in that particular case was the girl's life probably was at risk given that she was so young, and so likely she could actually have had an abortion in Ohio under the law as it was constructed. I don't know a lot about the law there specifically, but as far as I know, every pro-life law has explicit carve-outs for if a mother's life is at risk or she's at risk of substantial impairment. So in a case like that, typically my assumption is a doctor's best medical judgment would be this child, basically, right? This young girl cannot remain healthy if she carries this baby to term. So I think that would always fit under a state's exception, as sad as the situation is for everyone involved. Heartbreaking. All right.
Just a few thank yous before we conclude and one announcement. First, I want to thank my staff, Sean Griffith's staff, Mary Frances Myler. I have the best staff on campus, and I'm so grateful for them, so thank you. Thank you to MD Right for Life. You guys are fantastic. Thank you for your witness to the truths of the Catholic faith and for fighting for life. I mentioned that this talk was sponsored by the Napa Institute. One of the purposes of the Napa Institute is to create a culture of life. Ms. DeSantis' book is for sale, but knowing the benefactors who support the Napa Institute, I think they would want me to say, how many undergraduates here? Okay, we don't have enough books for all of you, but if you promise to read the book, I'll buy it for you. Okay, and Zan, would you be willing to sign some books? Okay, so if you already have a book, why don't you get that signed? And if you would like a book and promise to read it, why don't you make your way over to the table and we'll give you all books. Before we conclude, please join me in thanking Zan DeSanctis.